So, I've been on YouTube going on right under 3 years now, bringing you guys builds from my PlayStation 4 right over until I built my PC back at the end of 2022, with of course my most popular video being building Breath of the Wild in Minecraft Part 1, Hyrule Castle. And as we all know, we've seen plenty of people have their take on Breath of the Wild in Minecraft. Of course, we got Grazi, my good acquaintance. There's been plenty of other people who've made the map in World Painter. There have been plenty of people who made smaller versions of the Great Plateau, smaller scales of the entire map. There's been people who've made the data pack for the game. And there have been plenty of other people who have made many other Zelda maps as well. Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I've never seen anyone tackle all of Tears of the Kingdom in Minecraft though. I mean, sure, there have been a couple of people who have built the Great Sky Islands, you know, some Skyview Towers, Zonai Shrines, all that good stuff. I mean, rightfully so, like somebody would have to be completely insane to build the entire surface, depths, and the sky of Tears of the Kingdom in Minecraft. I mean, surely that's the reason we haven't seen that project pop up anywhere yet, right? Like, who would do that? All right, fine, I guess I'll do it. Okay, my good buddies. Now, I don't want to waste any more time, and neither do you guys, right? So let's just get right into it. Now, if you've been around the channel before, then you know that Breath of the Wild has a height map that someone created years ago that people can import into things like World Painter and get a base terrain of the actual map. So similarly to what I did when I created the Breath of the Wild Minecraft map, I imported the infamous height map into World Painter, but this time I used a scale of 18,000 by 18,000 blocks, essentially making my map 1-to-1 in scale. I know that the map is estimated to be about 10 by 8 kilometers, but when it transfers over to Minecraft, the scale is actually somewhere around here in terms of Minecraft. Now, I've already done this part before, so I just went around doing sand all around the borders of the map, making sure that the beaches were put in place. I overlaid World Painter with a high-res map of Breath of the Wild just to make sure I got all of the ponds and stuff in the correct positions, and basically just did all of the standard procedure things, you know, put the water, put the ponds, put the sand, stuff like that. Now, two things that I did very, very differently this time around that I didn't do for Breath of the Wild. I dropped the map to about -1,000 all the way up to 100, 150 blocks, just so that I can make room for the depths and the sky, meaning that you will not be able to play this map if and when it comes out without a height generation data pack. If the map comes out, there will be a data pack in the data pack folder depending on what version of Minecraft I'm on when it's finished, if it's finished. And the second thing that I did is I made a custom cave layer within World Painter, and I just carved out underneath the surface to make room for the depths. It ranges from about -1200 to about -1800, something like that. And doing it this way, I believe, was the only possible way I could achieve getting the sky, surface, and the depths all into one map. Now, lastly, I want to go over how I'll be tackling the series and the map. Similar to how I'm handling my Breath of the Wild in Minecraft map, there will be 15 parts for each Skyview Tower, and I want to tackle the sky and the depths that are associated with that Skyview Tower. So for example, if I'm tackling Lindor's Brow, I will do everything on the surface associated with that region. I'll do the sky islands that are shown on the map upon activating the Lindor's Brow Skyview Tower, and I'll associate the light roots underneath said region, and I'll tackle those in each individual part. And for part 1, I think I want to start with Hyrule Field and everything associated in that region, so the Great Plateau, the Colosseum, and Satori Mountain. And for part 15, the very end, we'll do Lookout Landing, Hyrule Castle, the Great Sky Islands, and Hyrule Castle Chasm. But we're a very long way off from that, so for now, let's start with the basics and tackle Hyrule Field. Now, just like the start of any project that you may find on YouTube, I wanted to start by building up a bunch of modules that we might use all around the map. Of course, Tears of the Kingdom takes place a few years after Breath of the Wild, and in the game's lore, we find out that Zelda and a bunch of her compatriots are in the process of rebuilding Hyrule after the Great Calamity, and as such, Hyrule is now littered with a bunch of the Hyrule restoration materials. These are basically those dark wooded workbenches that are scattered all around the kingdom, so we're going to start by building these up, as well as some of the small Sky Island remnants that are fallen all across the land into the ground. So of course the base block I used for all of these was dark wood. I used mine rails to get those wooden wheels that are on the platforms in the game, littering the platforms with crafting tables and barrels. I got some wood logs in there as well. Then once those were done, I started making a bunch of random shapes for the Sky Islands that are fallen. The Sky Islands are basically cylinders that are just stacked on top of each other. Then after making some larger and smaller variants, I coated it with a dark texture consisting of a block of netherite and gray concrete, and then I was ready to move on. Now the way I want to structure these videos is I want to do the surface, sky, and depths in their own sections of the video. So for today, we're going to start by Satori Mountain and the surrounding area, making my way towards the Coliseum, then tackling Hyrule Field and the Skyview Tower, before ending off with the Great Plateau. Now, Satori Mountain was a bunch of terraforming work. As you can see, I'm just going around putting in all of the missing peaks, cliff sides, overhangs with red concrete, as well as any ponds and lakes that are missing. As you'll see throughout the rest of the map, a lot of these cliff sides are just flat due to the height map generation. So I made them more interesting using the rock tool within Axiom, just to give them a little bit of more roughness and character. Now, after texturing the mountain and putting in all of the flora, I started with one of the two caves here on Satori Mountain, which is the Foothill Cave. I ended this cave off by putting in the red hinox before moving back up the mountain to do Satori Mountain Cave. This cave was a lot more intricate, so you could see me just winding in and out doing all of the different rooms. And once both caves were finished, I went around the mountain and put in a bunch of the fallen Sky Island remnants that are sticking out of the terrain. Now for the small little savanna biome on the south side of the mountain in the valley, I made 6 custom baobab trees and just scattered them throughout this valley. Moving east, I did the Light Forest, which had a large pond in it as well as a blue hinox. And after that was finished, I jumped into Sanderden Park Ruins. I began by putting down some basic shapes, and then I started with this wall here. I pasted in one of the fountains that I built way back in my Breath of the Wild project, as a lot of those modules will be reused in this map since, you know, it's kind of the same Hyrule. But coming to the end of Sanderden Park Ruins, you can see I used an assortment of stones as well as some tough blocks. Here I got one of the budded fairy fountains that I built months ago, and this is going to be going right above the outskirts stable. Now jumping into what I've dubbed Outskirt Peninsula, I pasted in the stable before texturing some mountains and putting in some trees and the shrine. And once that was done, I doubled back to connect up Satori Mountain and this peninsula with Manhala Bridge. Now taking one of my stone talus modules from the Breath of the Wild project, I worked on this one to create the Battle Talus scene in Tears of the Kingdom. And this goes by Gleeok Bridge north of Outskirt Stable. And the white wool version is just going to be used in different biomes around the map, as it'll be easier for me to color and texture it depending on the biome. Now here you can see the 2 wells that are near Outskirt Stable. The first one being the Stable Well and this one being the Hills Well. Coming up on Dig Dog Suspension Bridge, the terrain isn't much different from Breath of the Wild, but what is new is that there is a mini stable here, a large Zonai wall that's fallen from the sky, and a Zonai device dispenser that is over on top of an island that sits out in the water. So I started by doing all of the terrain work for the different rocks, and then I just linked them all up with dark oak bridges. And then next I jumped into making the mini stable module, which I will be saving in my blueprints folder. And after that, I jumped into making this large Zonai wall that's lodged in the earth. And this was extremely fun because it was the first piece of architecture from the Zonai people that I began to work on, and it was going to allow me to establish a style for the rest of the map. So now that that little pocket of Hyrule Field was done, I continued east and started work on the Coliseum. Now you guys saw me build this before, but since the scale is now 1:1, I did have to remake it. But being that this is like my 2nd or 3rd time building the Coliseum, it wasn't too bad. It only took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The first time took 48, so definitely a tone down in time. Now, I'm sure you guys know that there is a Thunder Gleeok in the Coliseum, so here you can see all of my different Gleeok modules. And after I ruined the Coliseum, you already know what the deal is. I started working on one of these Yiga huts that are scattered throughout the many caves in Hyrule. The Coliseum is known to have the Coliseum cave right underneath it, so that's what this was for. And here you can see that cave in its finished state with the hut inside. Now, once the cave was finished, I went around the Coliseum and dressed up the terrain and put in all of the ruins and trees. And then I ended this region off by putting the little Goron minigame at the top of the mountain. Now, to make sure I connected the Coliseum up to the rest of Hyrule, I did have to rebuild Aquame Bridge, and upon completing that, I moved north towards Mount Daphnis and completed the little well and the house on the shore side. I then moved east all the way across Hyrule Field towards the Riverside Stable, doing some of the stuff that you guys already saw me do, which is not that interesting. Here we got Riverside Stable, and we also have Whistling Hill Cave, which you guys will be able to explore when the map comes out. Now, right to the north of Hyrule Field Skyview Tower, we have Exchange Ruins. And then to the south, we have Lake Colomo with an enemy camp and 2 forests on each side. Now, moving on to the East Post and Outpost Ruins again, I moved through this area really quickly. And I wrapped up the surface of Hyrule Field by doing Scouts Hill and the ruins to the west of it. Then last but not least, I pasted in the Skyview Tower that I've already built on the channel, and if you haven't seen it, I'll link it right here. And I did the little bridge and connected it up with one of the enemy tree camps that I built a while back. Now, moving on to the Great Plateau, I wanted to set myself a record and do the plateau within 5 days. So wasting no time, I jumped right into rebuilding the walls surrounding the plateau. Now, one major difference between these walls and the ones on the alpha version of my Breath of the Wild map, you know, these walls are built to scale, which means that these walls are standing at about 85 blocks tall. So with figuring out how high they needed to be, I finished up the entrance, and then I moved into the wall that's going to be scattered around the rest of the plateau. And as soon as those were done, just like last time, I pasted them all the way around, doing some light terraforming here and there as needed. So at this point, I just put on the episode where I built the old Great Plateau as I was building the new Great Plateau. I promise I'm not narcissistic or anything. It just got me in a groove, so I was just following myself along. And luckily for me, the Shrine of Resurrection in Tears of the Kingdom is just a big giant cave. So making my way towards the entrance, all of this stuff was just second nature, as you know, I had already did it before. I did create some new modules this time around, like these pillars here, as I wanted to make sure I got everything even more accurate than I did in my Breath of the Wild map. But anyway, after getting the entrance area down, I began to make my way south towards the bridge that's broken in half. And after realizing the new bridge design, I worked on the wall that sits right next to it before working my way over towards the Eastern Abbey. Now, for the most part, I followed the same routine as I did the first time around, but I used some new tool masks and techniques to make it go by faster. And once the Eastern Abbey was finished, I worked over towards the south of the plateau. Now, unfortunately for the old man, or spoiler alert, King Rome, his hut back here has been turned into the Yiga clansman's hideout. So I created a similar design as I did the first time around, but there's a lot more detail in this hut, namely the wooden stake fences that surround it. I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't know how this was gonna turn out, especially like the lampposts, but I think the design ended up looking nice, and once I was done with it, I just placed the trees all around. Now, breezing through the plateau, jumping all the way to the north side, I began to work on the Forest of Spirits, doing some light terraforming here and there. I also pasted in a lot of these stone archways as they are in the game. Of course, there's the large tree stump and the battle talus that's to the west of it. And I don't know if I did this the last time out, but there's this large peak that I had to terraform here as well, before putting the shrine back there in the pocket. And then to end it all off, of course, I just changed the biome to a forest and put all of the trees and plants. Now, the last region, of course, you guys know is Mount Hylia. I did the basic terraforming and did a lot of the jagged peaks. I turned this entire region into red concrete, and I used the angle mask technique that I learned from good buddy Grazi in one of his live streams when he was working on Hyrule Castle. Basically to turn the more shallower angles into snow and the steeper angles into the mountain texture. Now, after you guys just saw me build the gate, I began to work on some of the ruins in Mount Hylia, namely all of the broken bridges and pillars sticking out of the river, as well as this broken wall on the west side of the mountain. Then to finalize Mount Hylia, I built the cave behind the waterfall, and then I put in the rest of the trees and flora, and with that, Mount Hylia would then be completed. Now last but not least for the Great Plateau, of course, is the Temple of Time. I did have to rebuild this at a slightly smaller scale, which is kind of interesting, seeing as everything else was upscaled. But as you guys could see, after I got the central spire down, I just started working on the side towers. And when I was finished, I began to make my way towards the back of the temple, doing the 6 window modules before ending it off by doing the back outcropping. Then moving on into the interior, I made sure to try to get some of the intricate details down to a smaller scale. And after working on the side tower, I just did the roof design and copy and stacked it all the way to the back of the temple. Then I'm sure you guys know that there are 3 more buildings that make up the Temple of Time ruins. And unlike last time, I just built one of these this time around and copy and pasted it 2 times and ruined all 3 buildings separately. Now once that module was completed, I pasted in the Temple of Time and its 3 buildings. The red concrete powder is just symbolizing where the stone walkways are gonna go. And then I just made my way up the hill, ruining all of the buildings. Then after that, I began to ruin the Temple of Time, of course, putting in all of the holes and rubble everywhere. I also did a little bit of more light terraforming around the area. And once that was finished, I began to ruin the walls around the plateau and putting in some more dirt and cracks. With the last thing needing to be done is the Great Plateau Foothill Cave. And with all of those small details out of the way, the Great Plateau as well as the surface of part 1 would finally be completed. There are quite a few sky islands within the Hyrule Field region. The one big island chain that sits right above the Forest of Spirits and Lake Colomo. And there's also one lone Flux Construct Island that sits right above Satori Mountain. I decided to work on the Flux Island first, as there is another one that's right above the Great Plateau. So I'll just build one and copy and paste it over. A lot of these sky islands will be repasted around the map, just like some ruins. So just knocking these out first made more sense to me. And with all of that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the sky region of Hyrule Field, starting with the Flux Construct Island. So I started with a large cylinder with a diameter of about 115. Then I went around the edge with even smaller cylinders and put the cone at the bottom of it. Next thing I began to do was outline the stone pattern on the surface of the island, just with some intricate patterns and stuff like that. And I used yellow terracotta as the base block for the grass. I could have used a biome generator, but I want this to be as vanilla as possible with as least data packs as possible. Now the next thing I began to work on is some foliage and flora for the sky islands. Although you may see me use oak wood here, this will change within a few shots as I moved over to the brand new pale wood blocks. After that was done, I began to work on the island directly above Lake Colomo. Now, as I was tackling the sky islands, I was looking for more efficient ways on how to tackle them, and I found that just doing general shapes of the outlines is the best way to go about doing it. So you guys could just see me using different shapes as the island is coming to form here. I built a little floating box over there on the right as well, and I used emerald ore as the green lights on a lot of the boxes. And after getting the runway dialed in, I worked on the large pillar on the opposite side of the island. And with that done, this island would be too. There was a greater Sky Island chain above Lake Colomo, but it was mainly just copy and pasted islands, so nothing too special. Next thing I began to work on are the 2 islands that sit above and below each other, kind of to the south of the island that we had just wrapped up. As you guys can see here again, I just used a basic shape to get it down, outline where the walls would go and some pillars, and then if it needed to be rotated like these 2 islands are, I would do that after the fact. With the only special thing being with this island here is the big tree stump and some roots coming out. But once I got that down, it was time to move on. Now, even further south, we have this island that has the 2 circular fountains on it. I just started with a smaller and larger cylinder and filled them with water. And by this point, doing the sky islands began to come naturally. Now, for some of the last islands of this video, I did the little gyro moving island, whatever you want to call it. It was basically just a large hoop with 2 arms sticking off of it. And once that was done, I just did the small island to the left of it. I then moved on to the large island that has the Gerudo shrine on it. This one was pretty fun to do because of course it has the really unique design with the circular platform in the center. And it also has that cannon that launches in any direction that you turn it. It also has a Zonai dispenser up here, so I just pasted that in and wrapped this island up. Last thing I needed to do was work on the dome underside that's under the circular platform. And once I put that in, it was time to move on. Here's another flux construct island that's right under the islands that we just built. So I just pasted these in as it wasn't nothing too special. The last island in this region is the Star Island that's right above the River of the Dead of Mount Hylia. This one was kind of difficult at first because I've never built a pentagram in Minecraft. So I had to go back to high school for a moment and find the 3 angles of a star normally. And they're basically 36 degrees, 72, and 108. So you guys just saw me build one of the leaves of the star there in orange. And then I rotated it at the necessary angle to get the correct shape of the star. And once I had those in place, I finished up the tiny details, textured it up. And with that, the sky of episode 1 would be completed. Yes, Hyrule's lovely dark underworld. Basically a mirror image of the surface. The depths are housing tons of fungal trees and ancient Zonai structures that would need to be done. At the beginning of this section of the building process, I had no idea how I was going to tackle this area, nor did I know how I was going to go about getting the terrain, but I would leave that for future Zainn to figure out. So for now, let's start by just creating all of the different chasms in Hyrule Field, and then we will move on to creating a lot of the modules that will be scattered all around the underworld. So just by using the melt tool within Axiom, I went to all of the chasms in this region and just created a hole all the way down to the depths. Then I textured it up with my own custom gloom brush. I know I said in the beginning of the video that the map is from -1000 to 100, but I actually went back and changed that to make it from -64 up to 1000, and the depths are starting from -150, and the lowest point currently anyway is -350. But anyways, you guys just saw 3 of the mini palettes I'll be using down there in the depths. And here we're working on one of the mini Zonai device platforms that are scattered all around the depths. Next, I began to work on these massive arches that are scattered throughout the depths as well. And I went with a mainly stone palette, and I used tuff as the offset block to break up the gray color. There are also tons of railways in the depths because there are many mines. So I built one of the support beams that holds up the rails. Next, I began to work on one of the 2 common Zonai statues in the depths. This is the female warrior that's holding a sword. For the scale, I basically had to do the best that I could because I couldn't go too large with this, but I think it turned out decent. Next, we have the very large bargainer statue, and this was the first time I used animate build from Axiom, and I really liked that clip, so I just kept it. Last thing I did was craft its face, and I used sea lanterns as the eyes, and with some texturing, the bargainer statue would be completed. Moving on to some of the trees. These designs were very, very unique, and at first I didn't know how I would go about doing them. The small ones that go in a lot of the groves were simple, but these like puff shroom trees where you find puff shrooms at the bottom of these, I just started using tools like the path tool and creating some stems, and luckily it turned out decent. You can see I used the shape tool and some cylinders basically for some of the padded mushrooms. And after I got the bomb trees down, I began to work on the last of the large trees, which are basically the muddlebud trees. I then added a few more variations to some of the smaller trees, and with that, the trees would be finished up. So moving on to the next module, the light route. Now this was super fun to create. Mixing the path tool with some shapes and melding them together just to get the roots and the stems and stuff like that. I basically wrapped this design up really quickly, but I still loved how it turned out. And here you can get a glimpse of how it will look in the depths in the dark. But with the light root finished up, that will be the last module. And now we're ready to jump down here into the depths and get to work. We're gonna begin with the Great Plateau depths and work in reverse west all the way to Bloopy Burrow under Satori Mountain. So beginning right under the Great Plateau North Chasm, as I said, at this point, I didn't have an idea how I wanted to tackle the terrain portion. So I'm doing it basically by hand using the different variations of the elevation tool within Axiom. And as you guys can see, all of those tall columns of dirt are basically where water sources are on the surface. So I made my way over towards the secret spring of revival, which is basically just a large block. Getting all of the different platforms and columns down did take a while, but as I said, it is just a large cube, so it was kind of simple. But after getting the basic shape down, I just outlined the top border of the platforms with chiseled tough blocks and finished it up by texturing it and then pasting it in. I did more of the ridges and hills around this area and finished it up by pasting in the Grove of Time that you can see up there. Next, I began to work on the Hyrule Canyon mine area, and since at this point I didn't have the most efficient way of how to do it, I just created a large crater. I also built up one of these pedestals where the treasure chest sits down there in the mine, and I saved it to my blueprint folder. And luckily, a lot of these mines and structures from the Zonai were just large cubes, so those parts were very simple. You can see here I did the little cave where the mine rail goes inside. And the second to last thing to do for the Hyrule Canyon mine is this elevator shaft right under the west chasm. Here I built up one of the platforms that sits embedded in a cliff to the east of the Hyrule Canyon mine. This just got pasted in where it needed to go. I did some more terrain work and pasted in a few more modules and statues, along with the light root and some more trees. And with that, the Hyrule Canyon mine would be completed. Now lastly, for the Great Plateau depths is the Great Abandoned Central Mine. So after getting the base shape of it set up, I moved around to the back to work on the forge, as I wanted to build this up and save it in my blueprints because the forge will be reused in other mines in the depths. Moving back over to the main structure, I worked on the stairwell on the side of it and just worked my way up to the top. Then after getting in a decent floor pattern, I raised this entire structure all the way up in the sky, as I wanted to do the underside of it with the bargainer statue and take this entire structure and paste it into the actual map. So pasting this in at 30 degrees, I worked on the docks down there at the secret spring and put in the water. And the last thing I needed to do here was the cave underneath the mine, just to connect it up to the Hyrule Canyon mine. Now coming towards the end of the Great Plateau depths, I worked on the field out front of the Great Abandoned Central Mine, as well as one of the mine cart stops right underneath the Eastern Abbey. And once that was finished, the Great Plateau depths would be completed. Now here's where I got the idea to just mold over the terrain on the surface and flip it upside down and put it in the depths to get my terrain down there. We also have some Frox modules, as you can see here. And one of the brand new modules I'm working on right now is one of the Zonai Ascension Towers. These are one of the few towers that you can find throughout the depths where if you want to ascend up to the surface, you can do that here. So with the terrain flipped and put in the depths, I found that they kind of sped past very quickly, so I'm really mad I didn't do this to begin with, but whatever. And I just worked on the terrain right underneath the Outpost and East Post ruins, as well as Lake Colomo, as well as one of these brand new Yiga hideout modules that will be scattered all throughout the depths. I then worked on this chunk of terrain right underneath the Outskirts stable before jumping right into the floating Coliseum. So I just worked on one of the sides of the wall, and then I would just rotate it all the way around to get my shape. And I really liked how this turned out. I thought that this too would be very difficult to get down because the floating Coliseum is an odd shape if you go look at it in the game. But luckily it wasn't too bad, and after texturing it, I encased it in a rock exactly how it is in the game, finished up this piece of terrain, and the floating Coliseum would be finished. And I hope you guys stay with me all the way to the end, because the final stop for episode 1 is the Satori Mountain crater and Bloopy Burrow. After molding this from up top and flipping it down, this crater goes 400 and something blocks deep, which was crazy. But anyway, I started this entire crater out by tackling the Yiga stronghold up on top of this plateau here. All I needed to do was build this brand new shack module and put the fences in. I then worked on this area a little bit north where the obsidian frock sits up on top of this plateau, as well as pasting in the gloom luminous stone talus down in the crater. I pasted in one of the Zonai device platforms right under Goattail Lake before moving back south to wrap up the Light Grove and the surrounding area. And with that, we tackle the final area for episode 1, Bloopy Burrow. So starting with these Zonai platforms that sit in these 3 ponds down here, I tackled those quickly before hollowing out some of the burrows. And the last thing I needed to do was create this custom cherry blossom tree. And with that completed, Bloopy Burrow would be done. And just like the rest of the depths in this episode, I went around and put in all of the trees and large roots coming out of the mountains and stuff like that. And with all of that tedious work out of the way, part 1 would finally be completed. Thank you guys so much if you've stuck all the way to the end of this video. And if you did enjoy, I hope that you would give me a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more. And that is part 1 in the books. So there's a few things to talk about. First of all, honorable mention to my buddy Goat. She built the design for the gloom hands that you see in the video, and she sent me some pictures, and I asked her if it was okay if I just modified the design and used them in my map. And thankfully she allowed me to do so, so I just made mine a lot bigger to fit the scale of my map and changed a few blocks, but it is based off her design, so shout out to her. She also helped out with Grazi's project, so I'll leave a link to her YouTube if you guys want to go support her. I'd really appreciate that. Now, second off, in some of the clips in the depths, you can see that I use clusters of soul lanterns on the floor, and those are just to represent the poles wandering around the depths, so I think I forgot to mention that in the video, so I'm just letting you guys know now. Third off, I want to address the elephant in the room, my Breath of the Wild and Minecraft project. I'm going to show you guys some before and after shots of the alpha version of the map versus the final version of the map. As you guys can see here, the terrain is a lot more cohesive and fluent versus as flat as it was in the alpha version. Basically, to keep a long story short, way back in 2022 when I first created the alpha version in World Painter, the height map image that I used did not have the black bars on the outside of the image. And for whatever reason, that caused World Painter to completely squash my world like a pancake. So as I was moving into the lake region for part 6, I just noticed that a lot of the mountains were way too flat and short, and they weren't tall like they are in the game. And I told you guys back in part 2 of that series that if I don't like a build or anything about the map, I will go back and redo it to make it better. I just don't like half working projects because I know I can make it better. But by this point, I had realized that I would need to spend the next couple of months rebuilding the 4 regions I had already built, as well as the fact that Grazi was already coming towards the end of his map. So that, coupled with the fact that I would be out of content for a couple of months unless I worked on something completely different, coupling that with the fact that I don't believe the demand for the map would be as high, since not just Grazi but Breath of the Wild and Minecraft content, it's not necessarily saturated, I don't want to say that, but Breath of the Wild has been out for 8 years going on, so I just didn't feel like it would be as interesting wasting time having to rebuild. So I took a chance and started something new. But just like Nintendo, I still wanted to build in this Hyrule, and I realized that no one had attempted Tears of the Kingdom yet, so I just wanted to attempt it and see how difficult one of the regions would be to build. And if I found it too difficult, then maybe I would go off and do something different, but I wanted to challenge myself and be ambitious, so here we are. And that's not to say that I won't return to the Breath of the Wild project maybe at a later date, but it definitely wouldn't be before finishing this map. And so at the top of the year, I just decided I wanted to create a Tears of the Kingdom map 1-to-1, so the map is 16.5K by 16.5K. The bottom of the seafloor being at -64, and the top of Death Mountain currently is at 1020. At the start of each episode, I think I'm gonna terraform the entire region that we're working on. That way I can go ahead and get the pre-mold of that region and take it down into the depths before I put any cities and any trees and stuff like that, of course. In part 2, we're gonna move west towards Gerudo Desert, working on that entire region as well as Gerudo Town and the Lightning Temple. We're gonna make a clockwise loop all the way around the map, with the second to last region before Hyrule Castle being the lake region and the spirit temple that sits underneath it. Once again, guys, I hope you did enjoy, and hopefully you guys understood where I was coming from with the Breath of the Wild project. And if you did enjoy, again, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. It really would help me out and show me that you guys really are interested in the series. And with all of that being said, finally, I have been ZainnCraft, and I will see you guys in part 2 of building Tears of the Kingdom in Minecraft. Peace out.